Welcome to Side Part. I'm Nikki, your host, and today I'm so excited to have AC Hobbs on the podcast. She just released her debut novel, Scythe and Pen, in January, and has become one of my close friends here on Bookstagram. Welcome!
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited about your podcast, too.
Oh my gosh, it's been quite the endeavor, let me tell you. It's taken a lot to get it up and going, but I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to have you as one of my first guests. I have thoroughly enjoyed your book and just being friends with you and getting to know you. And I'm so excited to have other people get to know you too. Can you share a little bit about your background for just the people listening?
So my actual name is Abigail, but my pen name is AC Hobbs. I'm the author of Scythe and Pen, which is a dark fantasy thriller that just released from Counterpoise Press in January of this year. I am a writer, a stay-at-home mom, and I currently live in the South, in South Carolina, although I've lived all over the country. My background is in English education. That's what I studied, was English and then English education. And I started writing this book in, 2015, 2016. And
so it's been quite the endeavor.
It's been years of just refusing to give up, honestly. Just not taking no for an answer. But so it just released this year. So I'm very proud of it.
What was that like? Because I feel like a lot of people think the book journey is very linear. Like they're going to write the book, publish the book. It's all going to happen fairly quickly. But for somebody, it sounds like it took you a very long time to not only write it, but just get it published.
I feel like social media has made us think that it's like a quick process because, there's a lot of inspiring social media videos about that author that got a book deal out of college and it was just bam, 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 which that does happen sometimes. But for most people, I would say it's like a slog. It's a bit of a trudge, but which is fine. That's just how it is. But so I started writing it and kind of had the delusion that it was going to be that quick process. I worked on it for 4 or 5 years and really started promoting it on Instagram right away before I even was done writing it. And I started querying agents in 2019, actually the same month that I found out I was pregnant with our first child. So it was just a lot of stuff at once. Yeah.
I am useless when I'm pregnant. You're amazing. When I'm pregnant, I swear the whole world falls away. I go into a cocoon. I don't function. And I don't mean that meanly, but I just can't.
Hard. Yeah. Well, you're so tired because your body is constantly, you're going about your normal day, but your body is also running a marathon basically. So yeah. But I was very fortunate that I did not have a very hard pregnancy. I had some normal things, but nothing debilitating at all. So that was helpful. I started querying September 2019 and I actually got a agent offer in March of 2020. Well, actually late February 2020. But unfortunately, we all know what else happened in March of 2020. The whole world went into lockdown. And unfortunately, I did lose my agent offer. And that agent actually isn't even in the business anymore. And sadly, when agencies reopened to queries, I reached out to that agency again and said, you guys loved my book, back in 2020. Can I resubmit? And I basically had to query it all over again, and it was immediately rejected by the agency. So sadly, I had to start completely over. And that was 2020. I had a brand new baby girl. I had postpartum depression, and we were in the middle of trying to move across the country during a pandemic. So it was just a lot. So I actually almost completely scrapped the story. I almost tabled it and decided to just give up.
Which is to be such a shame because it's such an amazing story. It truly is. And I don't just say that lightly. I think people, I don't know, they assume you get a free book from an author and you're kind of forcing yourself to get, I hate to say it like that, but sometimes there's this notion that when someone gives you a free book, you feel pressure to give it a good review.
Obligated. Yeah.
Yeah. And to an extent that's true, right? I do feel this I don't know, this obligation, the author, to read their book, but there's sometimes authors give me books and for whatever reason, like I just don't love the story.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's normal. Yeah.
But I mean, like, that's just life and books and interests. And I don't think it says anything about the author, but when I read your book, I mean, even the language you use and like the theme. So for people who obviously haven't read it yet, and I hope they do, it's like a jazz age fantasy, which I don't think is out there. Like, I've never read a book like this. And I as someone who really like chronically reads fantasy, I really think that's just turned into my thing. I don't know how. I mean, I do know how. I started with ACOTAR and it was just kind of like this gateway. I don't know. It's a canon event, whatever. I'm glad it did though, because it allowed me to like read all these other books that I just love. And your book came at a time where I was kind of feeling a little bit stuck. Felt like I read everything I could read in the fantasy genre. And full disclosure, when I told you I was read your book, and I'm like, I kept, kind of putting it off. So I'm like, I'm burned out with fantasy, and I was on a romance kick. And let me tell you, you got me back into fantasy again. It was just, but it was so refreshing because it has almost this, I don't know if this is what you're going for, so correct me, please, but it has this like vintage noir feel. And like, I just picture the guy in the dark black and white room smoking a cigarette and like, he's cast in shadows. And immediately I was like, this is so different and this is so cool. And what a shame it would have been if you would have given up on this story and it wasn't available.
It was hard because it is a dark story and it does have a lot of like political elements and horror elements and like I would say like content. It should have a lot of content warnings, probably adult elements, I guess. And that was just really hard
I could see
to
that.
query in 2020 and 2021 from a brand new author. So I had a lot of people tell me that they loved it, but that they couldn't market it in that market at the time. So that's what was really discouraging. I kind of felt like I had written an unmarketable book, but obviously not, because it's out now and I'm marketing it. So
and you're doing it. Yeah. Well, I kind of, okay, this is my journey and totally sidetracked this whole conversation, but I just think there's something to be said about doing things that you align with and that you feel strongly and passionate about, because it might not be marketable right now, but there's a point where like someone has to change the narrative, change the script, make something different, because I mean, we just need things to change. Things are always changing. We're always looking for the next thing. And why can't your book or your idea be the next thing?
Exactly.
You have to have that belief, right? Like, right.
Yeah, because like trends, especially in publishing, trends change all the time. Like, and I feel like there's been, like what you mentioned, ACOTAR, it has really like dominated the fantasy scene, which is great because it has gotten so many people into reading that I feel like maybe would never have tried like a Brandon Sanderson novel or a, who else could I think of, a Tolkien novel. But like she was, like you said, a gateway for so many people. But we've also kind of been on this like romantasy, like fairy fae, like wagon for a while. So I feel like there's going to be probably a big trend change in the next couple years. Right. And probably. I think there's like,
and it's like saying, vampires will never be in literature again because Twilight had its time. It's like, no, we'll see these. Yeah, but these themes will ebb and flow for sure. I definitely think we've seen this huge resurgence, I don't know, which is great. But at the same time, I think we're going to see things starting to trend in different directions. And yours is a dark fantasy for sure, like very dark at times, but not in the way I think some people would expect, right? Like in a sense, like I have a hard time with some dark books. I do. I feel like sometimes it's almost too much. And I hate to say that. But I
actually do too. And I write dark fantasy, but like there's certain topics that I'm just like, whoo, that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, I felt the same way, but I never felt that about your book. Like I felt like it was appropriate for the vibe that was set from the very beginning. Like, I mean, when you read, is it okay if we do spoiler warnings for the opening scene?
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I just, you know, when they're like, you know, moving this body in the very first scene and it's grim and it's dark, but at no point did I feel like squeamish or like it was too much or it didn't fit what I already kind of knew from the blurb it was setting out to do. I felt like it was very appropriately marketed by you. Absolutely.
Probably like, I feel like the violence and the darkness is like what you would expect for like a gangster setting.
Yeah, like if you like mafia books, like I feel like it would be nothing compared to that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the thing I always compare it to is the TV show Peaky Blinders. I was like, if you have watched Peaky Blinders and liked it and you were able to sit through that, you'll be able to read this book fairly easily.
Yeah, well, and I just felt like this is like switching topics again, but I just felt like there's this push towards reading the popular books, which I appreciate, right? And obviously, I've read a lot of trendy books. I'm not going to pretend I don't. But I've had this really big, I don't know, call it a calling, if you will. I don't know. To really promote indie authors' books, because there's so many wonderful books out there. And sometimes, like you've mentioned this too, with like small pub authors, there's this notion that for some reason it's not as, I don't want to say legitimate, but like it's not as heavily marketed and by like the publisher, right? And so like there's this idea about what that means, like almost equating it to like I guess is it considered indie, like to publish like through a small pub? Yeah
because it's like because the publishing house is considered independent because they're not a subsidiary of a bigger house.
Yeah, and it's like such a shame though, because some of my favorite books are by small pub or indie authors, self-pub, like, and I've had this really big push this year to want to promote more authors doing it, either self-pub or indie pub, or because they deserve it. Like these are wonderful stories that deserve to have their voice heard.
Yeah, it's very difficult because one of the things that I didn't even know until I became published was just I guess like symbiotic nature of the industry, and like the big bookstores, you know, they have relationships with the big publishers, so it's even difficult to get independent books into bookstores unless it starts to trend on social media, and then of course they'll want it in their store because it's on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and it's going viral, so to speak. But so like that was the funniest thing I think for me was my book. Somehow my book has wound up in the South Carolina Barnes and Noble stores.
That's so cool.
It's really cool.
That's so cool.
It's really unexpected. And neither I nor my publisher quite know how it happened, unless it was just that South Carolina was like coming out in droves to ask for it. Or maybe I just had like a unsung hero at a Barnes and Noble store. But
how cool.
Yeah, but
cool.
It's kind of funny because they also, like other stores across the country, I get a message probably once a week from a reader saying that they were turned away at Barnes & Noble and that the clerk wouldn't even order it for them because it's a Amazon published book, which it's not. But sadly, that is kind of what indie authors have to deal with, is kind of being considered subpar or, you know, like a lesser quality book. And like literally by that, they mean like the book itself, like the binding and the quality of the physical product, not just the writing. But yeah, it's strange.
Well, first of all, your book is beautiful too, though. I mean, I remember when you said, like, I got it in the mail. I'm like, this book is gorgeous. Like, it truly is a really good looking book.
They knocked it out of the park with I was really proud of the design. It's gorgeous. It reminds me of a playing card or something.
It's beautiful. And I just think, well, and like, you kind of touched on social media, but I feel like there's a lot of people, aspiring authors or just writers in general, people that are unpublished, that really want to have their book out there. And I see a lot of like authors now, like who comes to mind? Like Nisha Tooley, she started self-publishing her novels and then gained traction and then was able to go like the traditional route. And I feel like it starts though, like with what you're doing, don't you? Like with like the almost like a grassroots kind of campaign to get your novel in the hands of readers and get people invested in your story to spread the word. And it's a lot of work on your end though. Like it's so undervalued how much work you have to put in. Like people don't realize. I mean, I've talked to you about it, but I think there's so much unpaid work that goes into like what an author has to do to promote something that they love.
Yeah, and honestly, even authors with agents and at big houses, they're doing it too. You're just expected now to have a social media following and to have a very active presence, which there's a lot of authors that still don't, but I feel like a lot of debut authors are really hustling hard with their own marketing, whether they're self-published, small press, or agented. It's a hustle right now in this world. But that's okay. I don't mind hustling for something I love. Like some days it feels like work, but some days I'm just like, I get to do this. This is cool. Like I get to make little videos about vampires and gangsters. It's like, this is
and how
fun.
cool is that? Yeah, I love that. But I do think something that I kind of always have thought about too, as someone who wants to write a novel and is working on one, is the importance of starting your social media, like almost just when you decide you want to start maybe doing this, right? And even just to like get your feet wet, kind of learn how to even make content, because that's like a whole art in itself. I feel like is trying to make content. Like, holy moly.
Yes. And it changes all the time because, again, the trends change or the algorithm changes or, the trending audio changes the day after you make yours. It's just so, it's funny keeping up with everything and you're like trying not to like it's your work, but you're trying not to like put your self-worth into it so you're not disappointed when stuff doesn't do well.
Oh, I'm not gonna lie, I struggle with this sometimes, and I think that's like usually when I'm starting to feel like that, wow, I'm like not good enough or I'm not getting enough engagement. Like that's my signal to take a step back and take a break, because at the end of the day, like we're just all out here floating on a rock, right? Like it's not that deep. Right. But I don't know. There's sometimes like I put so much time and effort and intentionality into something, and when it doesn't do well, I take this direct hit to who I am as a person, which is we've lost the plot at that point. Like this isn't the point. It's to connect with other people and to find like those points that we meet on. And sometimes the message hits, sometimes it misses. It says nothing about you as a person.
And sometimes it's not even the message. Sometimes I think it's just like timing, you posted at a funny time, or your, something about your keywords or what you did. The algorithm didn't like it, so it just it's like when you're a kid and you're like riding a boogie board at the beach and you're like waiting for the wave and like sometimes it just kind of like you mistime it and it like goes past you and you're like, oh man, I missed it. That's how I feel sometimes with reels, and sometimes you catch, it's like catching
lightning, right?
Yes.
Like it's like there's sometimes the reels I take literally minutes to make. Don't put a lot of thought into them. I don't even think they're going to do anything. Tend to be the ones that do really well. Yes. But when I'm like, yes, this is gonna land. Like this is gonna do well. Like it usually tanks, and then I'm like, oh man, I have no clue what's going to do well. But I actually did a podcast with Rights of November recently, and like her biggest thing is like just keep throwing stuff at the wall. I think that's what eventually something will help you gain traction, if you will. And I've seen you've made some awesome reels that just don't like, it's a shame because like, they're awesome. I'm like sitting there, I'm like, this is a cinematic masterpiece. Like, why is nobody liking this?
Yeah,
so, like, I love this.
Funny. And sometimes some of those do really well. It's like, there's no rhyme or reason. And like a piece of advice I've gotten before is like, whatever worked well, kind of recreate it. But that doesn't even work all the time. So it's
it's like, no, not at all. Why would it? Like, why would it be that easy? Yep. Truly. Like, why would it be that easy?
At one point in time, it was that easy on Instagram. I don't know if like the early ages of Instagram, it was actually pretty easy to create consistently good, engaged content. But now it's just kind of like, I'm just going to shoot this arrow in the dark and hope it lands. We'll see what happens.
I know. And I also like, I don't know if you do this either, but I have to keep reminding myself like what the point of Bookstagram is in the first place, because sometimes you get so into like making reels and content and growing and looking at numbers, and like at the end of the day you're there to like find other authors and books and people and connections, and like what am I doing? Like, why am I so heavily like, I'm not a marketing major, like I'm here to cultivate community. What am I doing? This is insane.
I know for me, it's like my, like, what I don't necessarily come back to specifically that, but what I come back to is if I can reach a reader a day. So like if I have one, even if it's just one comment of someone who says, wow, this looks awesome, or added to cart, or added it to my Goodreads, or even if I get a message from a reader. Like I got a message 2 days ago from a girl who said that she's on her third reread of it. And this book just released in January, but she's already on her third reread.
And it's a long book.
It's a long book. It's like 500 pages. And she was talking about how much she loved it. And she said, it's everything I've ever wanted in a novel. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to like soar on that for like weeks, because that's like the message you like dream about getting when you're
take a screenshot, put it in a folder. Yes. Like I literally have a folder like this where it's called like my rainy day folder, like the days.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And you look back, because actually like this is not the same as that, but I'll get a lot of messages from moms, like just seeing you doing this or trying to do something while also being a full-time mom. It's really inspiring. And I have to remember that too, right? Like I might be thinking something, really negative about myself or being really down, but if you help one person a day either laugh or feel seen, or like for you inspire them or give them something that brings them joy, like that's the point. Yep. That's why we did this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I made the book. I mean, I wrote it because like at the end of the day, I write because it brings me joy. I love to write. Like it's the thing I do, if I can, every day that makes me feel like me. But, like, and that's kind of all that matters. Like, it makes me happy. If it makes other people happy, great. Like, I don't have to go viral or become the next sensation. Like, I'm happy,
Well, as a mom too, though, I think there's these moments. My transition into motherhood was a little bit rocky. I had, it's a transition. And I know people talk about it loosely, right? Like, I hate when people are like, no one told me. Like, no, they try to tell you, but the way you're going to internalize motherhood and the way it's going to shape you, you can't necessarily prepare for.
No.
And I was one of those people that, I had my daughter in December of 2020, and that was like mid, in the thick of it. Yeah. And, I struggled heavily with postpartum anxiety, which I think is not abnormal to have some sort of postpartum mood disorder. And I wish it was a little bit more talked about. And like sometimes I think we only think it's postpartum depression. Like there's like a wide variety of mood disorders or things that you can experience postpartum, because your hormones are going insane, and it can be up to a year after. And so I also got pregnant 10 months postpartum. Had another one. And so like I feel like for 2 to 3 years, I was just in this like survival baby mode. And meanwhile, like I have this master's degree. I was a therapist. I even worked at a private practice while I was, pregnant with my second, and like while I had my first two. But man, I had this point, and I remember it was like, I had 2 under 2. I was just drained. Like, and I mean, I loved my kids. Like that was never the question. I feel like you can separate the two, right? You can feel also so depleted, so down, so unlike yourself, so dissociated. But at the same time, you could be like, I am in love with these humans, and I wouldn't trade a thing.
That's what gets you through it. Mm-hmm.
But when I started my Bookstagram last summer, and then I started writing again and just doing like getting back into photography and all these things that brought me joy, it's like that helped me heal.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Part of me is like, it'd be cool if like my account gained some traction, but at the end of the day, like I want to write a book. I want to do all these things that I know I have this skill set, right? I'm not an English major, but I have a communications degree. I have a master's in counseling. Like I have these skills, and I want to use them. And I love reading, and it brought me so much joy and healing.
Yeah. That's what I had the same thing with I had Aspen in June 2020, and I had terrible postpartum depression. I think the only reason I wasn't institutionalized with it or hospitalized with it was because my mother came out, and my mom's a retired nurse. So she's like the best person to have if you're going through like a medical thing.
Yeah.
So like my doctor literally said to me, if your mom wasn't there with, the background that she has, I would need you to go to the hospital. So thankfully I didn't have to. And I obviously, got medical help and all that stuff. But yeah, it was interesting because you just don't have time. Like when you have a newborn baby, unless you're just very fortunate and have quite the village, you don't have time to write or do anything other than like maybe eat. Hopefully eat.
If you're lucky, I feel like,
yeah.
And if it's nutritious, you're even luckier. Usually it's like I'm scarfing down whatever I can find or fast food or something, that was a huge part of it. Yeah.
Yep. But for me too, it was like when I guess it was like 2021 when I realized I wanted to query the book again and I wanted to write again. And, and it's like, it kind of helped me find me again after going through like a really like big medical experience of having a kid. It's like the one giant medical event you go through in life where the medical system's kind of just like, good luck,
Oh my God. Yeah. So I don't talk a lot about this, but a big like pipe dream of mine was I wanted to create like this postpartum center for women, like with my counseling degree. Like that was like the vision. And then like one thing I realized, there's two things actually. One, postpartum care for moms is crap. Like let's just call it what it is.
Non-existent.
They care they care so much about you when this baby's in you. And then they care about the baby once it's out. You get one checkup if you're lucky after the baby's born. And then they pretend to care if, like, but ultimately it's like, they're like, okay, well, we care about these pregnant people over here. Like, you just go figure this out now. You're fine.
Very like, almost like a revolving door. Like you go in and they're like,
yeah,
you're cleared for activity and here's your whatever birth control you'd like to have, and then it's like back out the door.
Well, yeah, and I realized I was masking so much. I'm like, I want everyone to think I'm thriving, even though my anxiety's through the roof, because I just want to be good at this. I want not to suck as a mom. I want to be the mom that everyone looks at that's like, you're killing it. And I was just killing myself. I was dying. It was like awful. And then the other thing I was going to say is that like moms don't want to go out and get the support either because they're so damn tired.
They're tired and you don't feel like
I just want to like go to bed
very like sore and sloppy like,
I don't talk a lot about my weight because I just feel like it's the least interesting thing about me, and women's bodies change so much, but I am not the bounce back mom. I am the mom that takes 2 years of kindness and consistency to like maybe start to feel like myself again. It's just, I mean, since like March of 2020, I'm finally starting to feel like I recognize myself in the mirror. And that was done through like self-love, consistent walking, not being, literally like letting my hormones regulate. Cause I do extended nursing, and that's a whole other thing that sets your hormones. I don't know. Anyway, I just feel like women are taught like, okay, you have to pretty much pretend like you didn't have this baby too. Mm-hmm. Like you have to look like you didn't have it, act like you didn't have it. You have to take care of this thing, but also not look like it or act like you are tired or anything. And so that's what kind of inspired my Bookstagram, was like, I feel like there's this whole pocket of women that one, love reading, but two, just want to support each other. And bonus if they're a mom, right?
We're all tired.
We're all tired. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Partially from staying up late, partially because we're moms. But it's weird. I have less time than I've ever had in my entire life. Like 99% of my time is with my kids. Like, but I feel like I'm so intentional with my time now. Like right now is like, I feel so passionate with this little slice I carve out. I'm like, I'm going to make it worth it.
I'll make it good. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it like for you? Yeah.
So before I had a child, I had like a lot of hobbies. I would write. I loved to read. I painted. I like refinished furniture. Now I write and I read. And anything else I do, it's like a family activity. So, like as a family, we rock climb and stuff like that. But for me, everything for these books gets done at night or early morning. So I try to wake up before anybody else in the family. So I usually wake up at like 5 or 6, and that's the time I take to like read and like have my like coffee, and like that's like my time. I recently told my husband, I was like, do not come to me if you see my coffee and you see my book. Don't come to me with like a question about the day. It can wait until the coffee is empty. Like, don't interrupt the coffee time. But
well, and I've got my kids on that too. You know, it's kind of funny. They're 1 and 3, and they know like mom needs at least 1 or 2 cups of coffee in the morning, yes, just to like give me like let my battery like boot up. Because my kids, we all wake up at the same time. It's just how it works in our house. But I stay up really late to do these things. Like I'll edit the podcast at night, or I'll plan my reels out because I really do want to be there with them during the day.
Yes, that's how I am too. Like I really don't want to be distracted by my phone or my book that I'm writing during the day when I'm with her, because they're just so busy. And like, if you're not paying attention, anything could happen, you know? So
yeah.
Writing wise, all my writing pretty much happens once she's in bed. So a lot of the times I don't typically write every night, because I do try to have time that's just like downtime.
To be a human and relax and exist.
Yeah. But the funny thing is I, like you said, I have less free time now that I did before I had a daughter, but somehow I'm writing the sequel to Scythe and Pen so much faster than I wrote Scythe and Pen. So it's like, I don't know if I'm like more honed in, or if I'm just more focused, or if I know like, hey, I've got an hour, so I have got to get work done. But yeah, it's like almost done being written. And it took me 4 years to write Scythe and Pen, and it will have taken, if I actually do successfully write this book by the end of the summer, it'll have taken me 8 months to write the sequel. So
that's amazing.
Knock on wood.
That's amazing. I can't even fathom doing something that fast. I mean, granted, I feel like I did like my first draft, like outline. It took me like 6 months, but I don't know. Your books are mine's a contemporary romance. So
oh, that sounds fun though.
Fun. Yeah, I want to write a fantasy. I actually have like I'm starting like an outline, like a draft for an outline for a fantasy novel, but it's just so much more intricate.
Yeah, because you have to come up with like the world and
magic systems and like political systems. Like we're contemporary romance, you kind of plop them in our world and just write their story.
Any state you want, or any country you want. Yeah.
So many things are assumed, and people already know because they're living in the same, hopefully living, you know, they have some context for what you're writing. Yeah, no, it's just so hard. It's being a mom though. I don't know. I feel like I kind of have this new superpower where I can basically make something out of nothing now. Yes. Or before I had kids, yeah. I feel like I spent so much time like needing the pressure of like limited time to make things happen, where now like I literally have these 10 minutes or I won't for another week, so I better make it happen right now. Like it has to be now or never. So
yeah, and I feel like the funny thing about having a child too is it made me feel very strong, like
yes,
just going through the labor and delivery process. I came out on the other side of that feeling like, not in the moment feeling like warrior woman, but like looking back, I'm like, that is one thing in life that no one can help you with. Like, you get through the pain by yourself. You mentally get through it by yourself. You physically get through it by yourself. You have people there kind of trying to coach you, but like, you're the only one in your body. You can't pass the ball to someone else.
Yeah. Well, and a heads up, I'm going to talk about birth trauma for just a second. So maybe skip ahead a little bit if that's triggering you. I just want to give it to anybody who's listening to this, a heads up. Cause I know for me, if you're pregnant or, you know, you had a bad experience, just like, don't listen to this next 30 seconds. But, I had a really bad delivery with my daughter. So I didn't have an epidural, but I had a bad shoulder dystocia.
Oh no.
And well, and it was just like a really tough time where I felt like my body failed my daughter. She had Erb's palsy for a time where like one of her arms was paralyzed, and I didn't think she was alive when she was born because she wasn't responsive. Like she was blue. Obviously she's thriving now. So there's a happy end of the story, but I think that prompted so much of my anxiety, right? Like if you know anything about anxiety, it's rooted in control. And it really impacted me so much, like not being able to control that, or I wanted to do everything perfect. And that was one thing I had no control. Like in that moment, it was just happening to me, and I was doing my best. I felt it all. It was really scary. But then I had a really easy, quick delivery push for 5 minutes with my son, and that was really healing, actually. So I will say, if you have gone through a really rough birth experience, like going through it again can be really scary, but it was really healing too. So like, I think sometimes, I don't know what I was thinking, getting pregnant so quick right after, but
I struggle with the thought of having any more children because the June 2020 birth experience was like not at all what I thought it would be like. And I had I had a placental abruption. I had a hemorrhage, I guess.
That's so scary.
So it was very scary. And, it was, like you said, when Aspen was born, they like whisked her to NICU, and because I had bled so much and she had like inhaled some stuff, so they had to whisk her away. But thankfully, she was fine. Like as scary and bad as it was, she came through it like the best you could hope for. Like she was fine. It's difficult to like choose to go through all of that again, but I don't know. I still have time, so I'll see what feels right.
I think that's like the other thing too, though, is I'm not recommending, like, first of all, what I did. Like, I think there was a lot of healing that happened, and I wouldn't change a thing. Mentally, though, having 2 under 2, after really not dealing with some unprocessed trauma from my first birth, just like trying to plow through it, do what I thought was best. I like who I am now, though, and I can confidently say that. Like, I like the person that I've become. I like the mom that I am, but it wasn't an easy road to get here. And I think I'm so passionate about like supporting moms and supporting women postpartum and showing women that like you can find happiness in like motherhood and post like, really hard postpartum season.
The thing too is like motherhood doesn't have to be the end of your personal story either. Like I feel like
it's just the beginning. Yeah. Like
it's just like a cool chapter break. It's just a new story.
It's a cool I love that. A cool chapter. A new I love that.
I feel like my most exciting years have been since I had a child. And like I wouldn't change it for the world. It's kind of funny, just the parallel of like when I finished the book and found out I was pregnant, and then I started querying again when she was a baby, and then now she's 4 and the book is finally out. And I don't know, it's just like her little life and my book have kind of grown together side by side. So it's been
like your 2 babies next to each other. Yeah. Not to say, it's like, oh, your book baby and your actual baby, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think there's so much power in becoming, and like, I'm also the first person to like totally honor when someone's like, I would never want to be a mom. Because like, I get it, because it's a huge commitment, and like, you have to want that first. Like, so no shade to anyone who doesn't want to be a mom wholeheartedly, but if you are in like a really tough season as a mom, 1, I see you, but 2, I just feel like there's a light, and it, I feel like things do get progressively easier. They really do. Because a year ago, I would have laughed. I tell people this all the time, but someone told me in June of 2023 that I'd be doing a podcast and making like reels and talking about books. I would have been like, yeah, okay, no way. Like, with what time, what energy? I'm also like the least stylish person I've ever met in my life. Like, I don't wear makeup.
No way.
No, I mean, like, but I just think though, I always thought people would make fun of me too. There was also that I I'm someone who heavily cares about people's opinion, or used to care about people's opinions of me. And so the idea of like me making funny reels and talking on the internet was just wild. Like,
Yeah.
you could not catch me doing that. Like, heck no. But then like there was this moment where I was like, but why can't I? Why have I put myself in this box of like, I'm not that type of person? And it's been so empowering. I cannot talk today. Empowering to decide to like be a little bit silly and let people see the side of my personality and connect with all these other people. Like, I would not have half of my friendships. Oh, no, let's be real. I have like no real friends in real life. All my friends are on Bookstagram, and it's amazing. And I met like authors like you who are like genuinely amazing people. And I wouldn't have these connections if I'd never made an account. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, honestly, I probably wouldn't have a book if I had never made an account because I would say the vast majority of, well, that's how I connected with or learned about and connected with independent publishers. And it's also where probably the majority of my sales come from is through social media. So if it didn't exist, this book might not exist. If I had never started pushing it and putting myself out there, we wouldn't have that book. So, yeah. And it is kind of like, I think for me, what was like so scary was like, I had hyped the book to like my little corner of the internet for so many years that I was terrified it wouldn't actually be good. I was like, oh my goodness, what if it publishes and nobody wants to read it? And if the people that do read it hate it, which I'm sure there'll be people who hate it or don't like it, and that is fine. I don't mind. But, so far the reception's been really good. So I'm like, hey, I didn't waste all those years. That's good.
No, and I feel like gosh, that's a valid fear though. I think for me, half the reason I've been dragging my feet a little bit on a novel is because it is horrifying to think you've put like your lifeblood into this thing, and then people are like, yeah, that's terrible, or you don't know what you're doing, or just totally reject it.
Say that. Like,
yeah, and I know that, but it's also horrifying. It's horrifying.
Yeah. That's something that I actually had to like internally like sort out for myself, because at first when it came out, I was like really invested in seeing the reviews, and like I really wanted to see it in people's pictures. It made me so happy, and I still enjoy that. It's great.
Right.
But one day I just had this thought, and I was like, you know, my identity is not my book. Like, and my identity is not found in how people receive my book. Like, that's something I've produced for the world, but it's not the entirety of me. So I don't have to draw any sense of self or self-importance from what society thinks of my book. Like, at the end of the day, I'm proud of it. And at the end of the day, it's like the book of my heart. So, which sounds strange to say, as scary as it is, but my heart is not this dark, scary place.
No, I think though, just hearing your journey and like how this book has impacted you, and just hearing how it helped you kind of heal in a way, right? And like believing in yourself. And like, that is just such a inspiring message that you believed in yourself enough to like keep fighting for this thing. And that is hard, like at its core, right? Is to believe in yourself enough.
Honestly, I think all authors have to do it. You have to believe in your book more than anyone else, because that's what gets you through querying. That's what gets you through submitting it to publishers. I mean, that's what gets you through marketing it. Like, you just have to obnoxiously, ridiculously, delusionally believe in it. Because for a long time, you're going to be its only cheerleader. And then eventually you get more cheerleaders, and it's really fun. But but at first it's you, and it's all on you.
I think that's one of the hardest things I've had to do, is learn how to take feedback. Like, when something isn't doing well, especially with like my account, like if I get feedback like, hey, this was either hurtful or tone deaf or whatever, it's like, that's feedback, even though sometimes it's unwarranted or not necessarily founded. But sometimes too much feedback isn't great either. So it's finding a balance, and who is a legitimate source of that.
It.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing when to ignore it, and when to grow from it, and when to adapt to it. Because sometimes, like, sometimes it's like, like at the end of the day, you hopefully we all know ourselves. And we kind of know if we need to amend what we're doing, or if we maybe just our message wasn't for that person, and you can
it's
just
okay.
be like,
Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. It's okay when our message isn't for somebody. And I think that sometimes sometimes I'll get random DMs from people and they'll be like, I don't like XYZ, or I feel like you're wrong here. And I go, okay, but maybe the message, that wasn't for you in this moment. That's okay too. Right.
I've gotten messages like, your book is evil, or your book has a demon in it. And I'm just and
you're like, accurate though. Like you read the description and you accurately assessed my book. Great job. I'm glad you read the summary. I don't know what you want me to say.
Like, one person, I know, sometimes I'm like, is it because it's red? Like, and it's like, people either think because it's red it's a romance, or because it's red it's evil. Like, there's no in between.
I know, but it's like, yeah, I feel like there is something like sinister in it, but like in a way that you would expect from a dark fantasy, right? Like with a guy who's, the main, one of the MMCs is Hades.
One of the main, one of the main characters is a villain. So he's supposed to be sinister. He's supposed to send shivers down your spine. You're supposed to be repulsed by stuff that he does.
That's the whole point of a morally gray character, right? Yeah. Like, you're not sure if he's good or bad.
Black. Yeah, he's morally charcoal.
I feel like there's morally gray characters, and then there's like the cuddly, morally black characters. Like, ones that we know are just horrible people, but they do like this one good thing, and we're like, I think I like him. I think he's good. Like, I think he could grow on me for sure.
Him. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, like, sometimes thank God I picked my husband, because my taste in like morally gray men in books is so bad, like so horrible.
My book taste is not the same as my real life taste.
Yeah, like I know. I feel like I need to like preface this. Like, the books I share and the men I like talk about in these books is not reflective of who I am in my real life. Yeah. So I want to ask one final question just before we wrap up here. If you could like leave one piece of advice for either new authors or aspiring authors, what would it be?
I think it would just be to like really write what you want. Like, don't just write to trends or write to try, like, don't feel like you have to write to the moment, because like the moment's going to change. The trend's going to change. Whatever is like the story that's like really laid on your heart, just trust it and write it, because at some point the trend, at some point you'll meet your moment. It may not happen exactly like you expect, because like for me, it didn't happen exactly how I expected, but I eventually found my way to yes. So, just don't worry so much about like, oh, it has to match these wish lists, or it needs to be like, just like what's hot right now. Like, just don't worry about that, and write your story in your voice, because no one else can do that. Like, no one else can write your story. So that's the best advice that anyone ever gave me. So I feel like that's the best advice I can give to any other writers, authors, whoever needs it.
I love that. No one else can write your story. No one else can write your story.
It's true.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for being on here and sharing your journey with us and being vulnerable and talking about your experience.
Yeah. Thank you for reading the book and liking it.
Well, you're especially welcome for that. And thank you all for listening and watching. And please like and subscribe and share this episode. Have a great day, guys.